The evening mist hung low over Fort Braxton as Sarah Chen walked alone across the dimly lit training compound. Her small frame moved with quiet purpose, combat boots making barely a whisper against the wet asphalt. Most soldiers would have taken the main road back to the barracks, but Sarah preferred the shadows. 20 years in special forces had taught her that the quickest route wasn't always the safest one. At 28, Sarah looked younger than her years. Standing just 5 feet 4 inches tall and weighing barely 130 pounds, she could easily pass for a college student rather than one of the military's most decorated operatives. Her long black hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and she wore standard-issue fatigues that hung loose on her petite frame. Nothing about her appearance suggested the lethal training that lay beneath the surface. 3 new recruits had been watching her for the past week. Jackson Mills, a hulking farm boy from Alabama, stood 6 feet 3 inches and weighed 240 pounds of pure muscle. Tommy Rodriguez from Detroit had street smarts and quick hands that had gotten him out of trouble more than once. Marcus Webb, the smartest of the 3, came from a wealthy family in Connecticut and thought his college education made him superior to everyone else on base. They had noticed Sarah during chow time, sitting alone with her tray, never speaking to anyone. They saw her during morning runs, always maintaining perfect pace but never socializing with other soldiers. To them, she looked like an easy target, a quiet girl who wouldn't fight back. They had no idea they were watching a ghost who had spent 2 decades perfecting the art of being invisible. The recruits had been complaining for weeks about their tough training schedule. Drill sergeants screaming in their faces, endless push-ups in the mud, and barely enough sleep to function. They felt picked on, singled out, and desperate to prove they weren't weak. In their twisted logic, intimidating someone smaller would somehow restore their damaged pride. Jackson had suggested it first during a late-night conversation in their barracks. "That Asian chick walks alone every night around 9, he whispered to his bunkmates. "Never talks to nobody, probably has some money on her. We could just rough her up a little, take whatever she's got, and show these drill sergeants we ain't pushovers." Tommy nodded eagerly. Life on the streets had taught him that showing weakness invited trouble. "She looks scared of everything anyway, probably won't even report it if we don't hurt her too bad." Marcus, despite his education, was the most enthusiastic about the plan. His father had always told him that weakness was unacceptable in any form. "It's perfect. 3 against 1 and she's tiny. We take her money, maybe her watch, and make it clear she better keep quiet about it. Easy." None of them had bothered to read Sarah's personnel file. If they had, they would have discovered that Sergeant First Class Sarah Chen had more confirmed kills than the 3 of them had successful push-ups. Her record was classified at levels they couldn't even pronounce. She had been dropped behind enemy lines in 7 different countries, spoke 4 languages fluently, and could kill a man in 12 different ways using only her bare hands. Sarah had earned her first commendation in Afghanistan when she was barely 19 years old. Her patrol had been ambushed by Taliban fighters in a remote mountain village. While her team took cover, Sarah had disappeared into the chaos. 20 minutes later, she emerged from a building behind enemy lines, covered in dust and blood that wasn't her own. 6 enemy combatants lay dead, and the remaining fighters had fled in panic. Her commanding officer had tried to recommend her for a Silver Star, but Sarah's missions were too classified for public recognition. Instead, she received a quiet promotion and orders for even more dangerous assignments. Over the next decade, she became the military's go-to operative for impossible missions that required someone who could blend into any environment and strike without warning. The irony was that Sarah had specifically requested assignment to Fort Braxton because she wanted to train new recruits. After 20 years of combat, she was tired of killing and wanted to teach the next generation how to stay alive. She had been planning to reveal her true identity to her training class the following week, but 3 foolish young men were about to receive a very different kind of education. As Sarah walked past the abandoned equipment shed, she heard footsteps behind her. Her enhanced hearing, trained through years of survival situations, picked up 3 distinct patterns. Heavy boots trying to move quietly, the rustle of standard-issue fatigues, and the nervous breathing of inexperienced soldiers attempting their first ambush. A slight smile crossed Sarah's lips. She had been in similar situations countless times, usually with much higher stakes than whatever these recruits thought they were planning. Her right hand instinctively moved to check her equipment. No weapons tonight, just her training gear and the knowledge that her body itself was a weapon more dangerous than anything these boys could imagine. She continued walking at the same steady pace, letting them think they had the advantage of surprise. Through peripheral vision honed by years of combat experience, she counted their positions. One moving to flank her left side, one staying directly behind, and one circling around to cut off her escape route ahead. It was actually a decent tactical approach for beginners, but they were moving too loudly and breathing too heavily. Sarah's mind automatically shifted into combat mode, analyzing threats and calculating responses. Her heart rate remained steady, her breathing controlled. She had faced Taliban fighters, cartel assassins, and international terrorists. 3 untrained American soldiers were barely worth breaking her stride. The recruits had no idea they were about to attempt mugging someone who had single-handedly eliminated an entire terrorist cell in Pakistan just 6 months earlier. They didn't know that the quiet girl they thought looked vulnerable had spent the last 2 years training Navy SEALs in advanced combat techniques. They were completely unaware that their target could bench press more than any of them despite her small size. As they closed in, Sarah made a mental note to use this incident as a teaching moment for her future classes. These 3 were about to learn the most important lesson in military training: never judge an enemy by their appearance. Unfortunately for them, they were going to learn it the hard way. The equipment shed loomed ahead, its shadows perfect for what the recruits thought would be a quick robbery. Jackson was already imagining the respect he would gain from other soldiers when word got around that he wasn't someone to mess with. Tommy was thinking about the money they might find and how it could buy them cigarettes and contraband snacks from the commissary. Marcus was planning exactly what threatening words would make their victim too scared to report them. None of them noticed that Sarah had shifted her weight slightly forward onto the balls of her feet, a stance that would allow explosive movement in any direction. They didn't see her hands relax into the loose, ready position that preceded every combat engagement she had survived. They completely missed the way her head tilted slightly, enhancing her already superior hearing to track their exact locations. Sarah Chen had survived 2 decades in the world's most dangerous places by never underestimating an opponent and always being prepared for the unexpected. These 3 young men were about to discover what happened when preparation met foolishness in the shadows of a military base, where the strong preyed on what they thought was weak. The stage was set for a confrontation that would become legendary among the enlisted men of Fort Braxton, though the official report would never reflect the true details of what was about to unfold. Jackson made his move first, stepping out from behind the equipment shed with what he thought was intimidating confidence. "Hey there, sweetheart," he called out, his Alabama drawl thick with false bravado. "Why don't you stop right there and have a little chat with us?" Sarah stopped walking but didn't turn around immediately. Her peripheral vision had already cataloged every possible escape route, every potential weapon within reach, and the exact positioning of all 3 attackers. The rusty pipe leaning against the shed wall, the loose gravel under her feet, even the heavy-duty extension cord coiled near the building's corner. Everything could become a tool if necessary. "We don't want to hurt you none," Jackson continued, taking several steps closer. "Just want to talk business. See, we're having some financial difficulties, and we figure a nice girl like you might be willing to help us out." Tommy emerged from the shadows on Sarah's left, grinning with the kind of street-smart confidence that had served him well in Detroit, but was about to fail him spectacularly. "Come on, lady, just turn around nice and slow. We see you walking around here every night with that expensive watch and them nice boots. Time to share the wealth." Marcus appeared directly in front of her escape path, blocking the route back to the main barracks. His prep school education had taught him about intimidation tactics, though he had never actually applied them in real life. "Look, miss, we don't want this to get ugly. Just give us whatever cash you're carrying, maybe that watch, and we'll call it even. No harm done." Sarah finally turned around, her movements slow and deliberate. Her face showed no fear, no surprise, no emotion whatsoever. She looked at each of them with dark eyes that seemed to catalog every detail of their appearance, their stance, their nervous energy. When she spoke, her voice was calm and quiet, with just a hint of an accent that suggested years spent in foreign countries. "You boys should walk away now," she said simply. "Go back to your barracks, forget this happened, and I'll do the same." Jackson laughed, the sound echoing off the metal walls of the equipment shed. "Oh, she thinks she's tough, guys, little bitty thing like her telling us what to do." He flexed his massive arms, muscles bulging under his tight fatigues. "Honey, I bench press twice what you weigh. This ain't a negotiation." Sarah's expression didn't change, but something shifted in her posture. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but someone with military training might have recognized the stance of a predator preparing to strike. Her weight shifted slightly onto her right foot, her left hand moved to rest casually near her belt, and her breathing became even more controlled. "Last chance," she said, her voice still maddeningly calm. "Walk away." Tommy pulled a knife from his pocket, a cheap switchblade he had bought from another recruit. "Lady, you ain't listening. We got you 3-1 and I got steel here. Stop acting tough and start acting smart." The appearance of the weapon changed everything. Sarah's training had always been clear about weapons. Once someone introduced a blade into a confrontation, the stakes became life or death. Her military mindset kicked in completely, and these three young men were no longer misguided recruits making a stupid mistake. They were enemy combatants threatening her life. Marcus sensed that something had shifted in the atmosphere but misinterpreted it completely. "See, now you understand the situation. We're not messing around here. Just cooperate and nobody gets hurt." Sarah looked at the knife in Tommy's hand, then back at his face. "You just made a very serious mistake," she said quietly. Jackson decided to end the talking and rushed forward, his massive frame moving with surprising speed for someone his size. He reached out to grab Sarah's arm, expecting to easily overpower the small woman. What happened next would be replayed in his nightmares for months to come. Sarah moved like liquid lightning. Her right hand shot up and caught Jackson's wrist as he reached for her, her grip like a steel trap despite her small fingers. Before he could react, she stepped forward into his charge, using his own momentum against him. Her left elbow drove into his solar plexus with surgical precision, hitting the nerve cluster that would temporarily paralyze his diaphragm. Jackson's eyes went wide with shock and pain as all the air exploded from his lungs. He couldn't breathe, couldn't speak, couldn't understand how someone half his size had just dropped him to his knees with what looked like minimal effort. Tommy reacted by lunging forward with his knife, aiming for Sarah's midsection. His street fighting experience had taught him to strike fast and hard, but he had never faced someone with Sarah's training. She sidestepped his clumsy attack, her hand shooting out to grab his knife wrist. With a quick twisting motion that would have made her martial arts instructors proud, she applied pressure to specific nerve points. Tommy screamed as his hand went completely numb and the knife clattered to the ground. Sarah followed up by sweeping his legs out from under him, sending him crashing onto the gravel. The impact knocked the wind out of him, and he lay gasping like a fish out of water. Marcus stood frozen in shock, unable to process what he was seeing. The quiet girl they had thought would be an easy victim had just neutralized two grown men in less than 10 seconds, and she hadn't even appeared to break a sweat. His prep school boxing lessons seemed laughably inadequate as he faced those calm, dark eyes. "Your friends are going to be fine," Sarah said conversationally, as if she hadn't just demolished two attackers. "Jackson will be able to breathe normally in about 30 seconds, and Tommy's hand will get feeling back in a few minutes. You can still walk away from this." Marcus's pride wouldn't let him back down, especially not in front of his friends who were groaning on the ground. "You got lucky with them, but I'm not some farm boy or street thug. I know how to fight." Sarah almost smiled. "No," she said quietly, "you really don't." Marcus charged forward, throwing what he thought was a perfect right hook. Sarah ducked under his punch easily, the movement so fluid it looked like she was dancing. As his momentum carried him forward, she grabbed his shirt and used a basic judo throw to send him flying over her shoulder. He landed hard on his back, his head smacking against the gravel with a sound that made even Jackson wince. The entire confrontation had lasted less than a minute. Three young men who had thought they were predators lay defeated on the ground, while their intended victim stood over them without so much as a wrinkle in her uniform. Sarah looked down at Jackson, who was finally getting his breathing under control. "What's your name, soldier?" Jackson Mills," he wheezed, still struggling to understand what had happened. "Tommy Rodriguez," came the pained response from the figure still clutching his numb hand. "Marcus Webb," the third recruit groaned from where he lay staring up at the stars, his head spinning from the impact. Sarah nodded and pulled out a small notebook from her pocket, writing down their names with a pencil. "Jackson Mills, Tommy Rodriguez, Marcus Webb. I want you to remember those names, gentlemen, because you're about to become famous around this base." Tommy struggled to sit up, cradling his tingling hand. What? What are you going to do? Report us." Sarah put the notebook back in her pocket. "Oh, I'm going to do much more than that. You see, boys, you just tried to mug the wrong person. My name is Sergeant First Class Sarah Chen, and I've been in Special Forces for 20 years. I've killed more people than you've met in your entire lives. The color drained from Marcus's face as the implications hit him. Special Forces, but you're Just what, small, quiet, female? Sarah's voice carried a hint of amusement. Those are features, not flaws. They're the reason I'm still alive after 2 decades in combat zones you couldn't survive for 2 minutes. Jackson finally managed to get to his feet, his massive frame still shaking from the nerve strike. We didn't know. Of course you didn't know. You didn't bother to find out. You saw someone you thought looked weak and decided to take advantage. Sarah's voice hardened. That kind of thinking gets people killed in the real world, and it's going to get you kicked out of my army. The 3 recruits exchanged worried glances. They were beginning to realize that their military careers might be over before they had really begun. Tommy found his voice first. Look, ma'am, we're sorry. We made a mistake. Can't we just forget this happened? Sarah shook her head. Too late for that. You escalated this to weapons, which means you escalated it to a court-martial offense. But I'm going to give you one chance to minimize the damage. Marcus struggled to his feet, hope flickering in his eyes. What kind of chance? Sarah smiled, and for the first time it wasn't a pleasant expression. Tomorrow morning, you're going to report to Colonel Davidson's office and confess everything. You're going to tell him that you attempted to rob a fellow soldier and that I subdued you in self-defense. If you do that, I'll recommend you for remedial training instead of a dishonorable discharge. Jackson's voice was hoarse but desperate. And if we don't? Sarah's smile grew colder. Then I submit my full report, complete with photographs of your injuries and a detailed account of your criminal behavior. You'll be out of the army within a week and facing civilian charges for attempted armed robbery. Your choice. The 3 young men realized they were trapped. They had thought they were hunters, but they had been prey from the moment they decided to target Sarah Chen. Now they had to face the consequences of their actions and hope that the woman they had tried to victimize would show them more mercy than they had planned to show her. The next morning arrived gray and cold, with fog rolling across Fort Braxton like a blanket of uncertainty. Jackson, Tommy, and Marcus had spent a sleepless night in their bunks, each replaying the events behind the equipment shed and wondering if they had dreamed the whole thing. The bruises on their bodies and the lingering soreness in their joints confirmed that their nightmare had been very real. At exactly 800 hours, the 3 recruits stood outside Colonel Davidson's office, their dress uniforms hastily pressed and their faces pale with anxiety. Jackson's ribs still ached from Sarah's precise strike. Tommy flexed his hand repeatedly to make sure the feeling had completely returned, and Marcus gingerly touched the back of his head, where a small bump reminded him of his encounter with the gravel. Colonel James Davidson was a career military man who had seen everything the Army could throw at him during his 30-year tenure. When his aide announced that 3 recruits were requesting an urgent meeting to confess to criminal activity, his first instinct was to prepare for another routine disciplinary matter. He had no idea he was about to hear a story that would become legend in military circles. Speak, Davidson commanded, as the 3 young men filed into his office and stood at attention. Jackson, as the unofficial leader of their group, took a deep breath and began the humiliating confession. Sir, last night at approximately 2100 hours, myself and these 2 other soldiers attempted to rob Sergeant First Class Sarah Chen behind the equipment shed in Sector 7. Davidson's eyebrows shot up. He knew Sarah Chen by reputation, though he had never met her personally. Her classified record was impressive enough that even a colonel only had access to the sanitized version. Continue. We thought she was just a regular soldier, sir. She looked small and quiet, and we figured she would be an easy target. Tommy's voice cracked with shame as he spoke. We cornered her and demanded money. I even pulled a knife. The colonel's face darkened at the mention of a weapon. Armed robbery was a serious offense that could result in court-martial and federal criminal charges. And what happened next? Marcus swallowed hard before answering. She defeated all 3 of us in under a minute, sir. We never stood a chance. She told us to come here and confess, or she would file a full report that would end our military careers. Colonel Davidson leaned back in his chair, processing this information. He had heard stories about Special Forces operatives with unusual backgrounds, but Sarah Chen was apparently more formidable than even he had realized. You're telling me that one soldier, working alone, neutralized 3 armed attackers without sustaining injury. Yes, sir, all 3 answered simultaneously. And you decided to confess voluntarily, rather than deny the incident occurred. Jackson nodded miserably. She gave us a choice, sir. Own up to what we did and maybe get a second chance or face the full consequences of our actions. We chose to tell the truth. Before Colonel Davidson could respond, there was a knock on his office door. His aide entered and announced that Sergeant First Class Sarah Chen was requesting permission to speak with him about an incident involving 3 recruits. Send her in, Davidson ordered. Sarah entered the office with the quiet confidence that marked all elite soldiers. She saluted crisply and stood at attention, her small frame radiating professionalism despite her unimposing appearance. To the 3 recruits, she looked exactly the same as the night before, calm, controlled, and completely unthreatening. The irony was not lost on them. Sergeant Chen, Davidson began, these 3 soldiers have just confessed to attempting to rob you at knife point. I assume you're here to file charges. Sarah glanced at the 3 young men, nodding their obvious fear and embarrassment. Actually, sir, I'm here to request permission to handle this matter through remedial training rather than court-martial proceedings. The colonel was surprised. Military protocol dictated that armed robbery should be prosecuted to the fullest extent, especially when it involved soldiers attacking their own comrades. Explain your reasoning, Sergeant. These men made a serious error in judgment, but they're young and inexperienced. They saw someone they thought looked vulnerable and made assumptions based on appearance rather than gathering intelligence. It's a mistake that could get them killed in a combat situation, but it's also a teachable moment. Davidson looked at the 3 recruits, who were staring at Sarah with a mixture of gratitude and disbelief. She was literally saving their careers after they had tried to rob her. What kind of remedial training are you proposing? Sarah's slight smile returned. I'd like permission to include these 3 in my advanced combat training class. They clearly need to learn how to properly assess threats and understand that appearances can be deceiving. I think a few months of intensive training under my supervision would benefit both them and the Army. Jackson's mouth fell open. The woman they had tried to mug was offering to become their instructor. Tommy felt his legs go weak with relief, while Marcus struggled to comprehend the level of mercy being shown to them. Colonel Davidson considered the proposal. Sarah Chen's record, even the classified portions he couldn't access, suggested she was uniquely qualified to train problematic soldiers. Her unconventional approach might be exactly what these 3 needed. Very well, Sergeant Chen. I'm placing these 3 recruits under your direct supervision for special training. However, he turned his stern gaze to Jackson, Tommy, and Marcus, this is not a get-out-of-jail-free card. If you fail to meet Sergeant Chen's standards, or if you cause any further disciplinary problems, you'll face the full consequences of last night's actions plus any new charges. Yes, sir, all 3 shouted. Sarah nodded approvingly. Thank you, Colonel. I'll submit weekly progress reports and ensure these soldiers understand both the seriousness of their mistake and the skills they need to become effective members of our military. As they prepared to leave the colonel's office, Davidson called out to Sarah. Sergeant, I'm curious about one thing. How exactly did you neutralize 3 attackers so quickly? Sarah paused at the door. Superior training, situational awareness, and 20 years of experience, sir. Plus, they telegraphed their intentions from 50 yards away and moved like elephants in a china shop. The colonel chuckled despite himself, noted, dismissed. Outside the office, the 3 recruits found themselves walking alongside the woman who had completely upended their understanding of strength, mercy, and military professionalism. Jackson was the first to find his voice. Ma'am, why are you helping us? We tried to rob you. We deserve to be thrown out of the Army. Sarah stopped walking and turned to face them. When she spoke, her voice was serious but not unkind. Because 20 years ago I was young and stupid too. Not criminal stupid, she added quickly, but stupid nonetheless. I made mistakes that could have cost me my life or the lives of my teammates. The difference was that I had good sergeants who saw potential in me and took the time to train me properly. Tommy shook his head in amazement. But we pulled a knife on you, we threatened you. Yes, you did. And if you had actually tried to use that knife, or if you had posed a real threat to my safety, this conversation would be very different. But you're not criminals. You're just 3 boys who thought they understood how the world works and learned very quickly that they were wrong. Marcus stepped forward, his prep school manners finally kicking in. "Ma'am, we owe you our careers. How can we ever repay you?" Sarah's expression grew serious. "By becoming the kind of soldiers who protect people instead of preying on them. By learning that real strength has nothing to do with size or aggression and everything to do with discipline, training, and character. And by never, ever making assumptions about people based on their appearance." Over the following months, Sarah's prediction proved accurate. The three former would-be muggers became some of the most dedicated soldiers on the base. Jackson learned to channel his physical strength into protective rather than predatory behavior. Tommy discovered that his street smarts could be valuable when properly directed toward military strategy. Marcus found that his education was most useful when combined with humility and respect for others. The story of their encounter spread throughout Fort Braxton, though the details became increasingly embellished with each telling. Some versions had Sarah taking on a dozen attackers. Others claimed she had been armed with exotic weapons. The truth was actually more impressive, that skill, training, and experience had triumphed over size, numbers, and aggression. Sarah Chen continued her quiet work training new recruits, though her reputation for being someone you didn't want to underestimate grew considerably. She never spoke about the incident publicly, maintaining the professional discretion that had served her well during her classified missions. Years later, when Jackson had become a sergeant himself, he would tell his own recruits about the night he learned the most important lesson of his military career. He would explain that assumptions were dangerous, that appearances could be deceiving, and that sometimes the strongest person in the room was the one who looked the least threatening. Tommy eventually became an intelligence specialist, using his street knowledge to help identify potential security threats. He never forgot the feeling of helplessness when his hand went numb from Sarah's precise nerve strike, and he made sure to study anatomy and pressure points so he could both use and counter such techniques. Marcus completed his officer training and went on to lead soldiers in combat. He credited Sarah Chen with teaching him that leadership meant protecting those under your command, not dominating them. The lesson he learned behind the equipment shed influenced every decision he made for the rest of his military career. The three men stayed in touch throughout their service, bonded by the shared experience of having their worldview completely shattered and rebuilt in the span of one night. They would joke that they were probably the only soldiers in the army who could claim to have been defeated and saved by the same person. Sarah Chen's legacy extended far beyond that one incident. Her approach to training, firm but fair, demanding but supportive, shaped dozens of soldiers who went on to successful military careers. Many of them never knew the full extent of her background, but they all understood that she was someone special. The equipment shed where it all happened became an unofficial landmark on Fort Braxton. New recruits were often brought there and told the story of the silent girl who taught three bullies the hardest lesson of their lives. The tales served as both warning and inspiration, a warning about the dangers of underestimating others, and an inspiration about the possibility of redemption through proper training and genuine character change. In the end, what had begun as a simple attempted mugging became a transformative experience that changed the lives of everyone involved. Three young men learned that true strength comes from protecting others rather than exploiting them. One Special Forces veteran learned that teaching could be as rewarding as combat, and an entire military base learned to look beyond appearances when assessing both threats and allies. The night that Jackson Mills, Tommy Rodriguez, and Marcus Webb tried to mug Sarah Chen became the night they all discovered what it truly meant to be soldiers.